How's everybody doing? Welcome to tonight's edition of the Idaho Roundtable. Your guests tonight are Jennifer Lawama. She's a representative candidate for CP 2B. Mike Long, our
You can promote me directly.
Representative. Right? I mean, absolutely. It's not like the first time that's happened here. And Idaho Law, who's running for U.S. Senate against James Risch. We are all here tonight. And our conversation, go ahead and make sure that we're working on this. James, my man, thank you for that kind of patience. It's really appreciated. So tonight's topics, we're going to be discussing inflation, supply management, and food sovereignty as localization issues rather than federalized issues. Now, a lot of us have been coming up on this topic pretty heavy over the past couple of, months now, as we take a look at what's going on with supply chain issues, food supply, COVID a year ago when we initially ran into those first shortages because of supply and COVID absences in the supply chain, trucking, other issues. We continue to see that as we go further and further into this process, where we've looked at quantitative easing as a means of dealing with the COVID-related layoffs. Well, I shouldn't say layoffs because they weren't layoffs, were they, Mike?
Oh no, this was abject overstepping by every layer of government. There was not a layer of our government that was not involved in absolute violations of your rights to conduct commerce, your rights to go outside, your rights to freely and peacefully assemble. I don't think anybody had to quarter any soldiers that wasn't in a time of war, so we might be safe there. But I'm fairly certain that we could come up with a case where every single one of your Bill of Rights were violated, and we could probably tack on a lot of those that were reserved to the people in the states that we just can't think of off the top of my head.
Well, that Third Amendment, they're taking a look back and realizing that 3A, the soldiers of the time, were also the police of the time. So in this day and age, if you were to take that same progression, if you were forced to quarter the police, that's technically a 3A violation, if you want to look at it as a living language document. But that's a different topic. So we will come back around to that at some other time. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on the whole inflation deal? What do you think are the options we have for, as a state representative? This is what we got right now. We got a balance. Candidate for Congress, U.S. Congress, candidate for U.S. Senate, and we're looking at Sean. You're killing me, man. And no, the economy did not kill itself like someone else we know. And we're looking at two state legislative candidates. So we can tackle this particular issue of inflation on multi-tier, both state and federal. Jennifer, go ahead and give us what your options are moving forward on, inflation and what we're doing with supply chain management.
Well, since we're in this in-between state, a landlocked state, and I'm trying to think of how to put this so I don't think we really have to worry for a while for supplies, because just going to the grocery store, seeing all the new restaurants that are opening up around here, I don't know if that would be a problem in this area. Would people still be able to open up all these restaurants? There's new grocery stores. We have developments going in everywhere. I just don't see the supply chain affecting this area in North Idaho.
Okay, that's a fair assessment. Mike, what's your take on the South Idaho there in Meridian where you are?
Well, in terms of inflation, there's not a lot that can be done on the state level if we stay with our current system. So right now we have the Federal Reserve, which everybody should be at least familiar with. It says it on the top of all your currency, Federal Reserve note. So if we wanted to take state action to curb inflation, we would have to divorce ourselves from the Federal Reserve System. We would have to do essentially what Russia has done in this climate and develop a system of finance that isn't dependent on the US dollar, on the Federal Reserve dollar, which would necessarily mean we would have to do one of a few different things. One would be to develop a state-based currency, which was the way things were done for a while, and that posed some serious problems with arbitrage and exchange rates and failing banks and counterfeiting. So that's not an awesome option. It is an option if we're bold enough to take that option, but I don't think it's viable. But now we have cryptocurrencies. We have a huge variety of cryptocurrencies to choose from. They're suffering now, but I think fundamentally they're a sound system of money. They're not based in anything, but neither are our Federal Reserve notes. So we don't have to have the conversation of the currency's not backed by anything, because right now the currency's not backed by anything. But with the cryptocurrencies, we can make them finite so that they have value based on scarcity and fiat, which is what we absolutely do not have right now with the Federal Reserve notes. We've demonstrated that by printing and circulating a huge percentage of the dollars in existence just in the last couple of years. So in terms of inflation, there are some options that states can take, but it will require more effort, more integrity, and more cooperation than the states currently enjoy. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's a challenge. In terms of supply chain issues, it's my understanding that just in this Treasure Valley area, we have about 3 days worth of groceries, 3 days worth of supplies on hand in local warehouses, in stores. So if we were to lose Interstate 84, we would have 3 days to restore that and really hurry up to catch up to those 3 days that we lost. So if we have interruptions, which right now we are facing serious interruptions, everybody knows about the gas prices. Something that people don't necessarily think of is a lot of our commodities come into this valley by rail and by truck. And both of those operate on diesel fuel. And trains consume a tremendous amount of diesel fuel, even though they are more efficient per ton mile than a truck. You still have to have that diesel fuel to deliver a train from a point of origin to a destination. And with the increased cost of that diesel fuel, plus the scarcity of that diesel fuel that we're facing, we're going to have a serious problem with price inflation and with getting it, period. And another thing that people aren't really thinking about is that diesel exhaust fluid. There's currently a worldwide shortage of diesel exhaust fluid, which if you're driving a diesel truck built after 2010, you can't operate that diesel truck without that diesel exhaust fluid. And a lot of the new over-the-road trucks are newer than 2010 because several states have instituted rules saying you absolutely can't operate a truck that old in their state. So the fleets have transitioned over, just like, California mandated emissions controls back in the 60s. And everybody has a catalytic converter now because of that. Same thing goes with that diesel exhaust fluid. All new trucks need that diesel exhaust fluid. And with a worldwide shortage of that diesel exhaust fluid, we're going to run into a situation where the market's going to have to decide where the most efficient application of that is. And in a state the size of Idaho, we may not be a priority for efficient distribution just based on units of people versus units of product versus dollars available in the marketplace. So we need to pay really close attention to what's going on every day at your grocery store and every day in the news to be prepared. If you're not already prepared with a sound supply of the things that you need day to day, you're going to have to pay very close attention to what's going on, because when it falls off, it's going to fall off fast. And you're not going to have time to go to the store to stock up on toilet paper because it'll be gone before they tell you they're not getting more.
Right. Idaho law, your thoughts on the inflation and supply chain before we get into this much further? You're muted. You're muted, Idaho. Can't hear you. Okay, while we're working on Idaho getting his sound back up and running, some of the other issues that we talk about with, there we go. We're going to do the quick swap here. Okay, you there now, Idaho?
Can you hear me now?
We're waiting for you to connect. There we go.
Okay, I guess you're catching me through the phone. Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so the issue is inflation. Oh, I guess
Inflation
I
is
use this
supply
camera.
chain. You know, what are we looking at as far as the increasing costs as things continue to develop here in the United States with regards to rising costs of fuel, rising costs of supply shortages? You know, as a Senate, as a U.S. Senator, what are one of the options that you see as being able to resolve this consistent threat?
Bless you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had to take one sound system out of my ears so I can hear the other one because it was doing twice at once. So basically, let me set the phone up so that's my camera now. But
Yeah.
I started to say I'm concerned about, of course, property values, okay, in Eastern Idaho, and especially my own community here. In terms of inflation, property taxes, I assume elsewhere, have just skyrocketed. I mean, I know people that, you know, their taxes went up 150, or their assessment value went up $150,000 in 1 year. And I even know a property that I'm associated with, yeah, it's just tripled in 1 year. And so this is to us what we might call real property, okay, real value. That's what we have. And so when that goes up through the roof, you know, it blocks other people from even, you know, buying power, coming into an area unless you already have considerable amount of money. But on top of this issue of the prices, we are actually taxing people on what you call contaminated properties. I mean, this is the radioactive city, the most radioactive city in the world, and we are taxing people highly because we don't have any other base here in southeastern Idaho for for income, especially in Pocatello. I mean, basically,
Yeah.
it's people moving in. Bring your money with you. Hopefully, you'll spend it. You know, buying property and buying up new property, but no jobs. I mean, there's just not a lot of jobs here. And so we got a situation where people are property dumping. They're, when they do find out, they're in a problem, ignore it. But they're doing it illegally because this stuff had been outlawed in 1991. But, it wasn't cleaned up. And so it's not only a problem in Pocatello, Idaho, it is in all the cities that were affected by the Teton flood. Because the reclamation project for the Teton flood in Idaho used uranium materials in every one of those cities in eastern Idaho. That's how all the cities got contaminated. And in Rexburg, it's just amazing how much is in their farm fields. They did all the roads. They did all those things. So what are we going to do about inflation and buying power when the value, the real power of our properties should be zilch? And I got a neighborhood, they don't pay taxes. We're already in a case right now that we're not paying taxes either because these are condemned properties. So, of course, that is freaking out our mayor and our government. And so this is what we see. We got a real problem in eastern Idaho and in general eastern Idaho about property value because you shouldn't be selling it. You shouldn't be, got to deal with the problem. You got to clean it up. And so, I'm hoping to do some of these same things we're doing here on our workshops and town halls about the health effects in eastern Idaho and holding these things in the health department and cities that will sponsor them and getting the word out so people can start giving solutions. So just like inflation, you still got to go home tonight and sleep, get your family. You got all that. And if that is running you amok because the people are buying up properties that don't live here, and they're building all these things that people don't, are not from here. They're just renters, and everything's going up. So it's affecting them all, and they have no choice. So, yes, Pocatello is a poverty-stricken area, except for the fact of people who are ignorant of what's going on here, and they move in here and bring their money with them. And they're what they're banking on. They've always banked on growth, not sustainability or productivity in this community. We have the university and we have the city, the two major employers.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of this is really interesting, especially when we get around to the issues of food supply and food sovereignty. Yeah, as a congressional candidate, one of the things that keeps coming back to mind is Thomas Massey's SMART Act. When Thomas Massey came up with the idea that gives states back the power to control their own food distribution, what was it, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we ran into a problem with the federal government coming in because the volunteer canning industry here in the state of Idaho, mainly run by the LDS Church through their Deseret Industries. It was an all-volunteer organization. They were actually able to do all of their canning on their own. And they, like Seventh-day Adventists and some of the other religious organizations, all had these private processing plants that just sort of popped up in different places, small scale, so they were all scalable for the local economies, so that the volunteers could come in and work. And Libby and a couple other major producers actually went through and created new legislation, new regulation that created regulatory capture and temporarily shut down a lot of these organizations and their volunteer food supply, their food banks, for a brief period of time until they could come up to standard. And the interesting thing is a lot of these standards creates an awful lot of waste in the volunteer facilities. Like you can't can the apples from the church orchard unless the orchard is throwing up fences and it's prevented all of the natural wildlife from being able to enter into the orchard or into the farm. So you end up losing an awful lot of regenerative capability, and you're now looking at a different way of managing the food from seed to can, from seed to living room through all the different stages that are more or less mandated. We don't have a good farm to table program anywhere in the U.S. Okay, I shouldn't say that. We got a few good ones. California has been doing some good pioneering with it. New York's done some good pioneering with it. Smaller communities in Idaho where you can actually drive down the street to the little farm stand where they're selling their produce straight out of the garden. Some work. James, you're killing me, man. No, Monsanto's not going to solve this problem. I hate to tell you. They got a lot of big ideas, but their plans aren't sustainable. James, you're killing me with all these comments, man. But the thing is we look at these options, we need to be able to return food sovereignty back to the states. We need to be able to do that in a capable way. In Idaho, one of those things that you brought up with regards to the toxicity associated with land, with farmland, with where you're doing your gardening and your growing because of various issues that are unique to Eastern Idaho. For those of you who aren't familiar with the issues in Eastern Idaho, one, we have a phosphate mine over there. It in itself, when they go in and do the mining for the phosphate, creates radioactive residue. In addition to that, we have the oldest atomic plant in the United States. We were the first state in the U.S. to actually have an atomic city. So we got a significant amount of history with regards to radioactive waste, depleted uranium, the phosphate mine-based uranium, in addition to a lot of native to the soil that continues to affect and create region-specific diseases, no less, region-specific illnesses for a lot of our population. That, again, if we were being honest about market forces, if people understood what they were moving into when they moved into Pocatello, if they understood the health risks associated, the higher incident rate of cancer, we might not be seeing those retirees moving into this place for cheap retirement, especially as it would affect their health long term, affect their children, affect their grandchildren as a result. So again, market share, being honest so that we aren't coercing people into situations without them understanding the full extent of what goes on. So honesty in advertising, honesty in the markets continues to be a significant problem, especially where towns like Pocatello, willfully intentionally downplay some of the environmental damages associated with the regions. Mike, you brought up the issue of the gas as it continues to develop. Now, with an Idaho food sovereignty program, right now we have a major beef processing plant over along the Snake River over in south central Idaho that just was built. Simplot went into it with, I believe, Cattlemen's Association of America to stand up that. And so we have beef processing plants here in Idaho now, in addition to several other processing plants that are currently being manned by prison labor. Yes, folks, for those of you who aren't aware, we use prison labor in order to process beef plants here, or process meat here.
Yeah, for those of you that celebrate Juneteenth, slavery is alive and well in the United States. And your vice president, up until 2014, actually kept slaves in the form of prison labor in California to fight wildfires because they couldn't manage their budgets or HR department enough to hire enough firefighters. So,
yeah. So it is Juneteenth. The ironic thing about Juneteenth is in the 2 years it took the Emancipation Proclamation to circulate throughout the entirety of the United States, the 13th Amendment allowing peonage to become popularized, as well as the racially based policy enforcement that put more and more black men into the public prison slave labor population. Yes.
We just can't let go sometimes.
No, we can't. No, we can't. I don't know whether it's all those people from Missouri that came up after the Civil War or what the deal was, but yeah, we continue to see an awful lot of that.
Yeah, so I'd like to speak to James's comment that flashed up on my screen. I can't see the live comments because I'm not the hub, but in terms of Monsanto solving the problem, James, Monsanto is kind of part of the problem. So we went through this whole green revolution in the late 50s, early 60s, all the way up through the 80s, where we essentially dismantled our agricultural system that was based on family farms, small corporate farms, and sort of dispersed co-op farms, which wasn't nearly as efficient as the industrial model that we have today. But the advantage of it was the decentralization allowed for better reading of market signals and better localization of your food supplies. So, a state like California, which grows a tremendous amount of produce that we eat around the world, used to have, even when I was young, in the late 80s, early 90s, still had family farms that grew crops that weren't necessarily the most profitable crops, but they provided a variety. And they provided a nutritional variety and a variety that benefited the people as well as the farms themselves, because, everybody's heard of crop rotation. Well, we've gotten away from that. And we're focusing on chemical fertilizers. We're focusing on heavy machinery, which presents its own problems when you start talking about right to repair legislation. You've got, companies like John Deere that have cornered the market on large industrial farming equipment that farmers can't repair. So you're driving up costs for all the levels of farming, from the concentrated feedlots, which ideally would provide us an economy of scale where you can do a lot of work in a small amount of space and produce a huge amount of material. But then you have to transport it from that central location out across the entire planet, because that feed doesn't just feed South Central Idaho, it feeds the world. But if you have 15, 20, 30,000 head of cattle concentrated on the banks of the Snake River in south central Idaho, and you have one natural disaster, which we just saw in the country of Georgia, where hundreds of sheep were wiped out by a single lightning storm. If you have an event like that, which isn't a rare occurrence, or you have a drought in Idaho that causes the Snake River to dry up to the point where they're not allocating the water for those cattle, or you have a situation where a pollution event from eastern Idaho washes into the Snake River and poisons it, you're wiping out a food supply for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in a single event. Where if that production was distributed across large geographic areas in different places, in different climates, in different cultures, you can lose a few thousand head of cattle in Colorado, but that's not going to affect Africa, Australia, Asia, and Europe. It's going to affect a third of the United States for a while, but you're not going to wipe out the entire supply of beef to entire countries at one shot. So when you talk about Monsanto can solve this problem, certainly they can solve it in the short term. They did it during the agricultural, revolution, the green revolution, with hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, increased yields dramatically. At the turn of the century in 1900, your average farm could serve about 2.5 people per acre with food for the year. Now we're closer to 130 people per year per acre, but the size of the average farm went from between 20 and 50 acres up to 900 acres. And it doesn't take a lot to wipe out a single 900-acre farm, because that farm wasn't built to delineate property lines and to have distinct crop zones and distinct irrigation zones. It was designed to produce as fast and efficient as possible, which means it's wide open, which means that it has one or two water supplies. Mm-hmm. And that single massive farm is incredibly vulnerable to every market force that you can imagine out there, from energy in the form of electricity to run their pumps, to oil production, which drives up the cost of their machinery operations, their transport to market, their acquisition of fertilizers, which are made from petroleum products. So depending on that technology and that science makes us comfortable for now, but it puts us in an extremely vulnerable and dangerous position the farther we move into the future.
Yeah, so one of the things that we take a look at, a lot of us as, for lack of a better word, preppers, organizers, looking at food sovereignty from a local perspective, is the idea of the small family farms, being able to get back to the gentleman farmer concept, where somebody still has enough time to actually grow their own food and be able to produce it and take it to market. We're also learning to take advantage of some of the new technology developments. Drone planting is a concept for no-till drilling or no-till planting is continuing to be a development process. And we're also doing a lot more with drone overflights in order to map fields and understand where water shortages and certain things with regards to soil nutrients are continuing to be a problem. Again, this is one of those things. How do we approach this? Do we go with an economy of scale thing where we do these massive farms out in Nebraska, that are 1,000 acres that, one combine, or are we looking at smaller, where we're looking at a little bit of market competition that goes on with regards to that? How do we approach the future while being able to localize and decentralize so that we don't have 100,000 head crapping into the Snake River, affecting everything downstream as a result, which represents its own environmental disaster? In addition to like what happened in Kansas right now, where you had that high heat index that came through and caused nearly, 30,000 or 100,000 head of cattle that died there?
It was some tens of thousands.
It was a lot. We lost a significant amount of cattle. Now, this represents beef, not just for the United States, but as Mike was talking about globally. What are we looking at the supply effect related to that? Now there are conspiracy theories, and I have entertained these, But there is a saying, never attribute to malice what can easily be explained by incompetence. There is evidence that what happened in Kansas with regards was simply an oversight related to a combination of weather pattern changes that they weren't prepared for at a time where the field wasn't properly set up, the feedlot wasn't properly set up in order to adapt to the weather changes that came rolling in. So it's like, yeah, somebody should have expected it, but did they intentionally kill off, a million, tens of thousands of cattle? God, I hope not. Jennifer, you got something?
Well, I was going to say, just to keep it local, because we had talked about keeping it to what we can do locally.
Yes.
We can also eliminate the gas tax, grocery tax.
Yeah, absolutely. Local, we have the grocery tax. We're still paying that here in the state of Idaho, 6.5% for groceries, which is, even though they give a tax credit, it's a clawback. Every time you walk in and buy $100 worth of groceries, that's $6.50. That's a gallon, 2 gallons of milk. Maybe more here before too much longer. It's 2 dozen eggs, 2 dozen eggs, a loaf of bread, and a gallon of milk. That if you buy $100 worth of groceries, that's what you're losing paying that tax, and you don't see that till the end of the year. So yeah, the grocery tax.
We're talking about gardening and allowing people, giving them the tools or allowing them to garden. You know what I mean? Oh,
the idea that garden tools get tax-free status. Nice.
Well,
I like that idea.
1 out of 3 people that live up in North Idaho are senior citizens. We can't expect them to go out and garden. So we have to plan on also having an aging community and what actually an aging community is capable of.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit that, on a state level, get me started on taxes. This is going to add another 45 minutes to our show here. But in short, we need to get rid of the sales tax altogether. It's one of the most ridiculous taxes that I've ever seen. It's government assuming that it holds an ownership stake in commerce. Whatever you buy, sell, create, and dispose of belongs to the government. You have to pay them. It's ridiculous. The grocery tax should be an easy kill, but we were too focused on a lot of very strange social issues that absolutely had to get taken care of for some reason. While inflation is going up, 2 and 3 times, 3 orders of magnitude in a year.
Right. Was that we were concentrating on school curriculum when half the state wasn't even in school because of COVID restrictions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We had shut down the school and everybody went to homeschool. So get me started on education, too. Another 45 minutes on top of it.
Okay, we will save taxes and education for 2 separate later issues.
So, the foolishness that we engage in at the state level is a direct result of the single party rule that we enjoy here so much, because that single party, the Republican Party, feels so confident and so secure in their position that they can go off on these insane tangents of worrying about issues that might be an issue in another 2 years, or they might not, because there's really not anything happening there. And we're skipping over things like property tax relief. We're skipping over grocery tax credits. And to relate this to, food sovereignty and inflation and supply chain issues, like you said, Joe, every $100 you spend at the grocery store is $6 going to the state. That's $6 of food coming out of your mouth and your kid's mouth. That's $6 of starvation for you. Deal with it, because the state's getting paid. And here's the more fantastic part of this, is while your dollar is becoming worth less, and you're arguing with your employer to please give me a raise because my rent has gone through the roof, because my dollar is worth garbage, my food bill is up, my energy bill is up, my gas bill is up, my car payment's up, my variable credit card rate has gone up. The state is the only one that absolutely knows they're going to get a raise. It doesn't matter what happens in the economy. It doesn't matter what happens with inflation. If you were spending $100 last month on food, the state got 12, got 6. You spend $200 this month, you get the same amount of stuff, the state gets 12. The state gets a raise. The state prospers from your suffering. There's no other way to describe the system of taxation that we have. The only tax that doesn't enjoy a great windfall in these times would be your income tax, which is a whole other system of immoral thievery that I just can't abide by. But your property tax is going up. Why? Because the value of your dollar is going down. And at the same time, price inflation is pushing the price of housing up, which your county assessor comes along and says, hey, your little Cracker Jack box that you bought for 40 grand back in the 70s is now worth 375 grand. And guess what? We're taking our 3%, and the city's taking their 3%, and the mosquito abatement district is going to take their 3%, and the cemetery district is going to take their 3%. But don't worry, because the cemetery district will give you a bit of a discount on a plot if you live in that district and pay taxes. So when you die of starvation, because you can't buy groceries, you got a place to be buried. So that's awesome.
Don't get Jennifer started on the mosquito abatement district.
I was in mosquito control for 20 years.
And malaria,
I worked for a state agency.
no, believe me, I know malaria is horrible, and dengue fever and all these things. But for how much money do you need to spray for mosquitoes? It's not big of a
It's
problem.
different in Minnesota than it is here. I don't see this area having a problem, but
Can I
Minnesota.
try to see if my
Well, we actually have a problem with the mosquito abatement
Can
program.
I see if I have a sound problem?
You good there, Idaho?
Can you guys still hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah,
Yep.
I want to know. My phone is even getting warm this time. So, what about? I want to address a little bit as a segue the home gardening issues, the foods. I'll tell you something that you know even the industry down here had to face finally when I shared it with them. In 1980s, the tobacco company approached me from an EPA hearing on contaminations, and what I said in that hearing attracted them, and we met, and they wanted to solve the problem how uranium materials got in their cigarettes. And I met with them, and I'm the one that solved that for them. And when they were big, they pretty much only care about themselves, but they stopped the sale of high phosphate fertilizers, which are uranophosphorus fertilizers, east of the Mississippi River. East Mississippi River, J.R. Simplot materials were not sold. The Surgeon General had to remove the label that said cigarettes cause cancer. In the 80s, it got removed. Okay? And in the end, the problem was, yes, the tobacco industry solved their problems to a point, but no one stopped it being put on the food. And for 70 years, we've been putting uranium high phosphate fertilizer on the fields in eastern United States and western United States, but stopped for 50, 60 years in the eastern United States. But this material does not decompose. It does not go away. And so when I shared with them how this problem occurred and where they got it, they cut all their contracts out of FM's Simplot, JR Simplots, all their millions of dollars they lost here, and they still remember that. Now I've tried to work with them, okay, with Simplot to try to solve their finances, but the thing is, we've been doing this for so many years in the foods that we've contaminated a lot of people, and a lot of people are not happy that this happened, that we let it happen. But the reason it happened is because J.R. Simplot in 1941, really wanting to help the war effort, met with the government and had to get a special permit, which he thought was strange. This was his wife actually told me once that he was surprised he had to get this, to get the phosphate mining to go into, so they could help grow more potatoes for the war effort. But they never told him, and he didn't find out till around 1949 when MC Weapons Corporation moved into Pocatello, that was uranium materials in that phosphate materials that they make it. And now high phosphate was the easiest and most profitable way to make the fertilizer. So the uranium goes with the product. There's a little polonium that ends up in their gypsum piles, but most of it all goes with the crops, and it gets put on there year after year. So it's been showing up in California wines. It's been showing up because it has a fingerprint, by the way, and it's been distributed in foods from California. Migrant workers there, highest death rate is with leukemia and cancer. Now, this is what we call here in my functions the poisoning of America, because now it is being sold east of the Mississippi River, basically from subsidiaries and things related to the J.R. Simplot Corporation. No one has ever stopped it. The tobacco industry or the American Cancer Society has known since the 1980s, because we informed them then. You can look up radioactive fertilizers, NSA or NSC 2000. And if you get the right one, you'll see where they went after the tobacco companies too. So
Idaho.
My concern is we made a product that goes into fields and will hurt our economy, hurts everybody's economy. The glowing potato is a real thing that was a project in the 70s here. And I know people still who've done it with their black lights. But we wash the potatoes. So if you want to know more, sometimes I need you, all of you, to ask me what you know so you can build upon your understanding, because otherwise I'm sure I'll shoot right over your head on what some of these issues are. I know Joe's known me a long time and he's quite accurate on a lot of things, but when you get a chance sometimes, just ask me what you need to know. Let me build upon your knowledge base.
Hey, so is Congress for Law, that Idaho law points out, Congress for ID Law, you see his name tag there, that is his Twitter handle. So go ahead and hit him up on Twitter. He'll be able to respond to you and give you the information he has available related to, well, basically J.R. Simplot and a lot of the contracts that came out of his war support effort for World War II. Which made Simplot a homegrown industry, made him one of the Idaho corporate, bigwigs in agriculture that facilitated an awful lot of agricultural monopoly here in the state of Idaho under the Simplot banner and their current arrangements with Monsanto. Again, it is a very specific type of agriculture that is done here in the state of Idaho, simply because of the amount of influence that Simplot and in turn Monsanto have had. And in a lot of ways, Idaho has enjoyed success from it. But there are risks that are associated with it. As we pointed out, the environmental damage that's associated with the new feedlot that's gone in along the Snake River. It's getting ready to go active this year. Continuation of mining phosphates in uranium-rich soil and exporting those phosphates for fertilizer processes across the United States, continues to run a certain amount of risk, as we try and find alternatives in regenerative agriculture and a lot of other things to make our food safer to eat. And again, this is one of the things we talk about hemp agriculture. Hemp is one of those few plants that are actually able to suck the toxicity, being able to suck the uranium out or the radioactive properties out of the soil in order to make it viable for food production again later on down the road. So when you talk about that layer of issues, the phosphates that have gone into the soil from the Green Revolution style of planting and farming, the industrial corporations, what we put into the soil, what we take out of it as far as our food products, and how we can go about rehabilitating the land in a way to make our food safe again. You know, this isn't something we're going to be able to do from a universal policy perspective. We literally need to go up into Washington, D.C. and say, you know what? Idaho needs to address this specific issue for themselves. So you get up there and you say, okay, the FDA, USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior, okay, give Idaho the freedom to develop their own food sovereignty program that allows them to reduce toxic agricultural products that they introduce into their food supply chain. Because the longer we continue to eat these things that damage our bodies, damage our systems, you know, and the longer it takes us to get back to natural food products in a way that we can actually work with them and eat them, you know, the harder it's going to be to restore human health, reduce the cost of healthcare in the United States. Food is our medicine, folks. Food is our medicine. You know, so we need to get up to Congress, we need to get up to the USDA, we need to get up to the FDA and the DEA and say, no, we need to give the states back control of their food. We need to reduce the monopolies so that we can localize and distribute. So in case of a disaster, like what happened down in Kansas, or what we've seen happen in the Ukraine with regards to their products, you know, we no longer have that dependence on a monopoly that just crashed and burned. So,
I might add to that I might add to that, Joe, that the Ukraine, I know 3 places that sell the uranium phosphate fertilizers in the Ukraine to the breadbasket there. Okay,
yeah.
I deal with scientists in Jordan. I know you don't know much about Jordan, but Jordan is our strategic interest because 1/3 of Jordan is uranium materials, just like southeastern Idaho. And yes, they extract the uranium, but now they're also making the fertilizer. So when I say the poisoning of America, it's turning into the poisoning of the world. But I like little things that happen like in Jerome, Idaho. Okay, Jerome County. There's so many feedlots that they stopped using the uranium phosphates in their soils there. They're using the feedlot stuff again. And so at least in that, they have temporarily stopped adding more, but they got a 70-year history of dumping uranium on their soils in Jerome, but at least they have products and they have ways that they can eliminate it. That's why here in Eastern Idaho, everybody really knows about the uranium contamination. They don't buy or a lot of the people who have their markets and come to the food market and bring their products, they know about Simplot and they do not use that materials. And that's where we buy our food, a lot of us, because we know that it's contaminated food. And I know just even to the 80s, and they didn't start in 1941 in the tobacco fields. They started, I don't know exactly when, maybe the 60s. But in that short of time, the rates of cancer just kept climbing and climbing and climbing until it became very noticeable. And that's why the whole dilemma of cigarette smoking causing cancer. But no, nicotine, things in cigarettes do not cause cancer. But ironically, Spirit Cigarettes, who now have bought some of those older, cheaper fields, planted tobacco, and yes, the uranium is turned up in the Spirit cigarettes now. So I'm just saying, it don't go away. The best thing is not have it go with more organic as much as you can and promote it and other alternative things. And yeah. And my being is I have to deal with something. You need to be aware of what the Office of Environmental Justice new plan has come out to help rural communities. But watch what happens as I tackle them from the top to the bottom. What will happen? We'll see. We can hope for the best. But what will happen with Idaho in this? Because I've already asked the director, and then I got some other things I'm doing with them. I want to know if they even came to Idaho never mind their tour. But they
Sounds
said,
like a plan,
even
Idaho.
Biden said, no one is above the law. So
Sounds like a
we're out to
plan.
prosecute people. We really want to arrest them. So that's one of our strategies. Public charges against people and do our best to help that happen.
So we're down to 10 minutes left here,
Little
Idaho.
history here.
Yep. So,
Okay. And not
Mike,
to talk too much. Yeah.
couple parting shots.
Yeah. So while you, Joe, and I are up there in Washington, D.C., trying to pry all of our glamorous politicians away from the big sparkly projects to address, everyday issues like food sovereignty and then overregulation of these small things that the states can handle perfectly fine for themselves. Jennifer, I want to be working with you in Boise. And I'd like anybody that watches this, have a look at Title 37 of Idaho Code, specifically Chapter 11, 15, 17, 18, 21, and 3 through 5. These are dealing with things like raw milk, eggs, butchers, beef, and pork, poultry, dairy, and ice. We regulate ice in Idaho. I know for a fact, because I read through these things, and they're exhausting in their restrictions on who can do what and how and when and where, that we can tune this up or just straight repeal it. If we can build enough trust in our communities, in our local farmers to sell us good raw milk, we don't need a state regulation. If we can't necessarily trust them completely, we can certainly cut these regulations down far enough to where it's perfectly legal for my neighbor with a cow to bottle up some milk, send a small sample off to a lab, 24 hours later, get a little sticker from the state, just like your weights and measures sticker on the gas tank that says this is good to go. There's no reason that we can't supply enough food in every one of our communities to feed everyone in our community. The only thing standing in the way is regulations that were designed to accommodate bad actors in the market and to accommodate monopolies in the market. So, Jennifer, you and I got work to do in Boise. Joe and Idaho, you guys got work to do in Washington, D.C. I have a lot less faith that the USDA and the Department of Agriculture and the other departments are going to do anything that benefits us at this level. So it's going to be up to us at the state level to tell the federal government, if you want to have your laws, great, you enforce them. We're not doing it. We have our own set of rules. We have our own way of doing things.
I like that.
And we're going to do it this way. And if you don't like it, come on down, deal with it.
Come at us.
As my friends like to say, pull up.
But yeah, that's absolutely. Jennifer, you got a parting shot here?
Well, somebody I had saw on there that it said about senior citizens, and that was not my point at all, is that they should be home and be stuck in the bedroom just or with medications. I don't believe in that at all. My point was, because we were supposed to discuss all the local issues and what we would do locally, is that for several years I was on a public health commission in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, and we had to turn people away from being volunteer police and volunteer firefighters, but it was a younger group of people. When I moved here and they were talking about volunteer firefighters, at first I was like, well, why couldn't you just get people about hiring or funding for firefighters? I said, why couldn't you just have volunteers? Until I looked around, and there aren't a whole lot of people that are capable of volunteering in Bayview for the volunteer fire department. So that's what I was talking about, is that the issues in North Idaho are probably a little different than South Idaho. Are you guys there?
Yeah, we're here. Now, I think this one was the one James brought up.
Yep,
Wait till you're a senior citizen and someone 40 years younger starts telling you, what you want, what you don't want, and getting, this was it. Her 12 square foot room for the past 2 years locked in. Yeah, the idea that we are controlling our senior citizens right now when they could be contributing, even in minor ways, to the community. Yeah,
I'm so
developing that.
passionately against that. I don't believe in trying to control anybody, let alone a senior citizen. And that's coming back with like people in Boise and talking to them about, well, we have to protect our seniors. No, seniors have the autonomy. They can tell you what they need. It's not like all of a sudden you become 65 and you're incapable of making your own life decisions. It's also about respect.
But I will say, when you turn 81, you shouldn't be the president. I love you, Grandpa, but you can't be the president. I'm sorry. You can be the pater familia, but you can't be the president.
Go home, be Grandpa. Take care.
I wanted to let you know, Jennifer.
Okay, Idaho, you got
that
anything
we
on
have
the way
some
out?
similarity. Yeah, I got some. Let Jennifer know that when I came back, one of the first things I did was connect the Northern Idaho Bunker Hill issues down to our issues, because I worked on the Bunker Hill issues years ago to help some of those communities up there that were suffering from the contamination. And like everything that people do in government, they try to give it a different label. And so you don't get lead by itself, it comes from uranium. Okay, so they used the term lead up there, and that's what they focused on. And people are still caught up in that instead of the whole uranium series and the lead. Here, we call it phosphate issues and phosphate problems, but it's the uranium problem. And so you have gotten millions and millions of dollars. And one of the newspapers up there that isn't owned by the Adams family, they seem to be still concerned about the issues of the contaminations from those mining activities. And if you know, they want to use the word silver, just like they tried down here in Idaho, southeastern Idaho, but there is no silver here at all. There is some silver up there, but they're just going to contaminate the area by reopening those mines. And that's a problem. That's a problem that you're going to have to face up there in the Panhandle. And as I said before, you know how they solved the Lake Coeur d'Alene contamination? Just leave it alone, and hopefully nature will bury it in a million years or whatever. A long, long time. As they said, don't disturb the lake. So anyway, again, if you want to know more, I know a lot about that area too. Thank you.
Okay, so again, Jennifer Luoma, she's on as Jennifer Luoma on Twitter. That's her handle. Mike Long, Chubby Primate. You see my handle there, as well as Congress for Idaho Law. Now, we sort of bounced off of our original topics of inflation, but again, this comes back to localization and decentralization, localized distribution centers, and being able to develop your specializations on a small enough scale that collapse of one system doesn't end up destroying an entire economy. Bring it back to localization. And of course, I love the discussion about have autonomy, regardless of age, but be responsible with regards to what your capability is. As we've talked about volunteer firefighters, not everybody who volunteers to be a firefighter should be volunteering to be a firefighter. Pay attention to what's going on in your community, help develop those relationships. And one of the things like Mike and Jennifer are talking about, build that trust with your community, understand how to network, and provide feedback on those farmers, those providers who aren't giving you the quality of goods that we expect from our local providers. This day and age, we can do a lot more with a Yelp review than we can with food regulation. A lot more, which is why we have some of the best taco trucks, in the state.
Oh, yeah. A 1-star Google review will shut down a bad restaurant so much faster than the health department will ever.
Yes, it will. Okay. So with that, folks, remember, family, friends, and community. As long as you got all three, you can make anything happen. Catch you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.